Grizzlies belong in the wild, yet we sometimes put them on stage. In one tragic twist, a circus performance became a nightmare when a bear snapped its chain and tore through the crowd. From public shows gone wrong to ambushes in frozen wilderness, these are 6 true tales of bear attacks that shattered the line between human control and raw animal instinct. Each one exposes the devastating cost of underestimating nature's power, especially when that power comes with claws, teeth, and a fury no man can predict or contain. Nizhny Tagil, Russia, 2025. The small industrial town of Nizhny Tagil, situated in the remote Ural Mountains region of Russia, had little to offer regarding entertainment. When the Zolotaya Zvezda traveling circus arrived on May 9th of 2025, it was met with considerable excitement. The town, with its population of barely 5,000, had a troubled economic history since the collapse of its primary steel mill in the late 1990s. Residents eagerly awaited the rare opportunity for distraction, particularly during the harsh winter months when temperatures regularly plunged below -30 degrees. Pyotr Vladimirovich Kuznetsov, the town's middle school mathematics teacher, had decided to treat his twin daughters, Anastasia and Yelena, to the Friday evening performance. The girls had begged for weeks after seeing the colorful posters plastered across town, particularly enamored with the promised appearance of Mikhail, a massive 700-kilogram Russian grizzly bear known for his bicycle-riding tricks and ball-balancing routines. The circus tent had been erected in the town's central square, a cramped space normally used for the weekly farmers' market. Local officials later admitted that safety regulations had been loosened to accommodate the circus, including minimum distance requirements between wild animals and spectators. The Kuznetsov family arrived early, securing front-row seats directly facing the central performance ring, believing this would provide the best experience for the 8-year-old twins. 3 other children sat nearby. Dmitry Sokolov, the 11-year-old son of the town's pharmacist, Ekaterina Morozova, a 9-year-old whose father worked as the circus's temporary electrical technician, and Nikolai Petrov, the 6-year-old nephew of Nizhny Tagil's mayor. None could have anticipated the horror about to unfold. The evening's program had proceeded smoothly through the first 40 minutes, featuring acrobats, clowns, and a horse-riding display. The crowd's anticipation peaked when Mikhail's act was announced. The enormous bear was led into the ring by his trainer, Alexei Barsukov, who had worked with performing bears for over 20 years without serious incident. Witnesses later reported that Mikhail had appeared unusually agitated from the moment he entered, refusing initial commands and making low, rumbling sounds that experienced handlers would recognize as warning signs. Nevertheless, Barsukov proceeded with the routine, perhaps concerned about disappointing the eager audience. The trigger for the disaster occurred when a spotlight malfunctioned, producing a sudden, sharp popping sound, followed by an intense flash of light directly above the bear. Mikhail reared up, towering over 3 meters tall, and roared with such force that several audience members described feeling the vibration in their chests. Breaking free from his restraint chain with a powerful lunge, the bear charged toward the nearest audience section, where the 5 children were seated. Pyotr Kuznetsov attempted to shield his daughters as the massive animal crashed through the flimsy barrier, separating performers from spectators. Mikhail's first swipe caught Dmitry Sokolov across the chest, causing severe lacerations. The bear then seized Ekaterina Morozova by her winter coat, shaking her violently before circus staff could intervene. The Kuznetsov twins suffered bite wounds to their arms and shoulders as they attempted to scramble away. Little Nikolai Petrov, frozen in terror, sustained the most serious injuries when the bear's powerful jaws clamped onto his leg, crushing bone and tearing muscle. Chaos erupted throughout the tent as parents frantically grabbed their children and rushed toward the exits. Several spectators were injured in the stampede, including an older woman who later required hospitalization for a broken hip. The circus's emergency protocol proved woefully inadequate. No tranquilizer guns were readily accessible, forcing staff to attempt to control Mikhail using fire extinguishers and metal poles. It took nearly 7 minutes, an eternity to those present, before the bear was finally secured after being struck with a heavy equipment case by a desperate stagehand. Emergency services arrived within 12 minutes, but the remote location of Nizhny Tagil meant the nearest proper hospital was over 60 kilometers away. The 5 injured children were transported by ambulance across treacherous mountain roads, with doctors later crediting the quick thinking of paramedic Svetlana Orlova for preventing the loss of Nikolai Petrov's severely damaged leg. All 5 children ultimately survived their injuries, though their recovery required multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. Nikolai would walk with a permanent limp, while Ekaterina developed severe post-traumatic stress disorder that required years of therapy. The incident sparked outrage across Russia, with animal rights activists pointing to it as evidence of the inherent cruelty and danger of using wild animals for entertainment. The Russian Duma accelerated legislation that had been stalled for years, passing new restrictions on animal performances 6 months later. Alexei Barsukov, the bear's trainer, faced criminal charges for negligence resulting in bodily harm, eventually receiving a suspended sentence and lifetime ban from animal handling. Mikhail was transferred to a specialized wildlife sanctuary in Siberia, where caretakers noted his continued aggressive behavior made him unsuitable for human contact. The Zolotaya Zvezda Circus filed for bankruptcy the following year, unable to recover from the legal settlements and damaged reputation. For the residents of Nizhny Tagil, circus performances would never again hold their former innocent appeal. Karluk River, Kodiak Island, Alaska, 1997. Thaddeus Wellington Montgomery, a 42-year-old investment banker from Boston, had saved for years to afford this solo fishing expedition. After 2 decades of navigating the cutthroat world of finance, Montgomery sought solitude and reconnection with nature. An experienced angler who had fished in Montana and Colorado, he nevertheless underestimated Kodiak's profound wilderness and its ursine inhabitants' territorial nature. Montgomery had been advised by locals to fish in groups and to carry bear spray at all times. In his eagerness to reach a secluded spot rumored to be teeming with salmon, he had ventured farther downstream than recommended, away from the other fishing parties. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy as Montgomery waded knee-deep into the cold, rushing waters, casting his line with practiced precision. He had been enjoying moderate success, having caught and released 3 respectable-sized salmon over the previous hours. Unknown to Montgomery, a massive male Kodiak bear weighing approximately 1,100 pounds had been observing him from a concealed position among the dense riverside vegetation. Wildlife officials later speculated that this particular bear, identified by its distinctive scarring as one nicknamed Old Scar by local guides, had likely been displaced from its usual fishing grounds by younger, more aggressive males during mating season. Montgomery had just begun to reel in another promising catch when he caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of his eye. Later, he would recall to park rangers that his initial reaction was not fear, but awe at the magnificent creature emerging from the foliage. That momentary hesitation proved nearly fatal. The bear charged with astonishing speed, covering the 30 yards between them in seconds. With no time to reach for the bear spray canister attached to his vest, Montgomery could only watch in horror as the massive predator plunged into the river, sending waves of freezing water in all directions. The bear's first strike knocked Montgomery off his feet, sending him backward into deeper water. The current, running stronger than usual due to recent rainfall, immediately began pulling Montgomery downstream as he gasped for air. The bear pursued relentlessly, its powerful limbs easily navigating the rushing water. Witnesses from a distant ridge later described watching in horror through binoculars as the massive animal repeatedly lunged at Montgomery, attempting to grab him with its enormous paws and drag him under. Montgomery, fighting the current and the bear, later recalled that the animal seemed intent on pushing his head beneath the surface rather than using its fearsome claws and teeth. Wildlife experts who reviewed the case suggested this behavior mimicked how Kodiak bears sometimes drown large prey like moose before feeding. A desperate Montgomery managed to kick free momentarily, finding brief purchase on a submerged rock. The bear circled back, growling with such intensity that even distant observers reported feeling the sound vibrate in their chests. With the animal preparing for another assault, Montgomery spotted a partially submerged log several yards downstream. Summoning his remaining strength, he lunged toward it, partially pulling himself out of the water. The bear pursued, its massive head emerging just feet away, water cascading from its thick fur. Montgomery prepared for the final attack, certain these were his last moments. In a stroke of extraordinary timing, a shout rang out from the nearby woods where Jasper Kowalczyk and Marjorie Thornton, 2 hikers who had wandered off the main trail, had stumbled upon the scene. Their sudden appearance and loud cries momentarily distracted the bear. For a tense 30 seconds that Montgomery would later describe as feeling like hours, the bear assessed this new potential threat, growling and swaying its massive head between the hikers and its intended prey. The bear chose to retreat in a decision that likely saved Montgomery's life, perhaps calculating that the effort and risk no longer justified the potential reward. The hikers helped Montgomery to shore, administering basic first aid before assisting him on the 3-mile trek back to the nearest ranger station. Though he had avoided fatal injuries, Montgomery suffered 4 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, numerous puncture wounds from the bear's claws, and severe bruising across his torso. Hypothermia from extended immersion in the glacial waters compounded his condition. Dr. Eleanor Fitzgerald, who treated Montgomery at a community hospital upon his arrival, noted that his physical fitness was likely crucial to his survival. The injuries, while serious, would heal completely within months, though the psychological trauma proved more persistent. Montgomery later developed a severe case of ursophobia, an intense fear of bears that required extensive therapy. Park officials initiated a search for the aggressive bear. Still, they called it off after wildlife biologists evaluated the incident and determined that the bear's unusual behavior fell within natural territorial responses. They concluded that Montgomery had inadvertently positioned himself between the bear and its intended fishing spot, triggering a territorial rather than predatory response. The incident resulted in enhanced safety briefings for all visitors to the Karluk River and the installation of additional warning signs at entry points. Montgomery eventually wrote a memoir about his experience titled Beneath the Surface: Surviving Kodiak, which became a modest bestseller and was used in wilderness safety courses. Yakutat, Alaska, 2005. The remote airstrip outside Yakutat, a tiny coastal settlement between the St. Elias Mountains and the Gulf of Alaska, was a crucial lifeline for the region's scattered communities. Bartholomew Bart Kincaid, a 36-year-old veteran bush pilot with over 5,000 flight hours in Alaska's challenging conditions, had been making the Juneau to Yakutat run for nearly a decade. Having grown up in Minnesota's North Woods before relocating to Alaska after military service, Kincaid had developed a healthy respect for the region's wildlife, but considered animal encounters part of the job. That perspective would change dramatically on the foggy morning of June 17, 2005. Kincaid arrived at the airstrip before dawn to prepare his Cessna 206 for the return journey to Juneau. The plane was loaded with time-sensitive environmental samples from researchers studying glacial retreat in the nearby national park in south-central Alaska. As was his habit, Kincaid performed a meticulous pre-flight check in the dim light, paying particular attention to the landing gear that had given him minor trouble the previous week. The early morning mist hung heavily over the runway, limiting visibility to approximately 50 yards. As Kincaid completed his exterior inspection and prepared to board, he noticed an unusual dark shape moving slowly across the far end of the runway. Initially assuming it was one of the local maintenance workers, he squinted through the fog before noticing an enormous brown bear ambling directly across his flight path. Having dealt with wildlife on runways before, Kincaid followed standard procedure by remaining near his aircraft while making noise to encourage the animal's departure. He clapped his hands and called out, expecting the bear to retreat into the surrounding forest as they typically did. Instead, the bear stopped and turned toward the sound, its massive head rising with sudden interest. Wildlife officials later estimated the bear was a male approximately 9 years old, weighing over 900 pounds, an unusually large specimen even by Alaskan standards. Territorial disputes with other males had potentially pushed this bear from its usual range, explaining its presence near human infrastructure and its aggressive response. When the bear began moving deliberately toward him, Kincaid realized the situation had escalated beyond normal wildlife encounters. He attempted to retreat to the safety of his aircraft, but the bear accelerated with surprising speed. Witnesses in the small terminal building later reported that the bear covered the 100-yard distance in seconds, moving with a fluid grace that belied its enormous size. The attack happened just as Kincaid reached for the aircraft door handle. The bear rose suddenly on its hind legs before dropping forward with its full weight, knocking the pilot to the ground with such force that his radio was dislodged from his belt and skidded across the gravel. Before Kincaid could recover, the bear delivered a powerful bite to his left arm, its teeth easily penetrating his insulated flight jacket and causing immediate severe damage to muscle and tissue. Kincaid later recalled experiencing an odd clarity during these terrifying moments. He noticed the bear's breath smelled strongly of rotten fish, and that one of its ears was partially missing, details he would later provide to wildlife officials. Despite intense pain, he remembered his wilderness survival training, curling into a protective position while trying to appear non-threatening. The commotion attracted the attention of Esperanza Rodriguez, the airfield's morning manager, who immediately activated the emergency response protocol. Rodriguez dispatched the airfield's only truck, driven by maintenance worker Tobias Jenkins, who approached the scene honking repeatedly. 2 other staff members followed with flare guns, typically used for wildlife deterrence. The bear, seemingly startled by the approaching vehicle and noise, maintained its aggressive posture over Kincaid, but hesitated to continue the attack. For nearly 40 seconds, the bear remained over the injured pilot, occasionally prodding him with powerful paws that left deep bruises across his torso. When Jenkins accelerated the truck directly toward them, the bear finally retreated several yards but continued facing the humans, showing no fear of the vehicle. The standoff continued until Wildlife Officer Mackenzie Whitefeather arrived with appropriate deterrence. A combination of rubber bullets, flares, and air horns finally convinced the bear to retreat into the surrounding forest. However, it remained visible at the tree line for nearly an hour afterward. Emergency medical technician Prisha Nayar provided immediate first aid to Kincaid, stabilizing his injuries before he could be transported to a community health center. The pilot had sustained deep puncture wounds to his left arm, severe lacerations across his back and shoulders, and a hairline fracture to his right collarbone from the initial impact. While serious, none of the injuries proved life-threatening, though doctors later noted that had the bear's teeth struck just 2 inches closer to his neck, the outcome would likely have been fatal. The Fish and Game authorities initiated a search for the bear, concerned by its unusual aggression toward humans in an operational area. After 3 days of tracking, officials identified the animal using Kincaid's description of its distinctive damaged ear. Biological samples confirmed it was the same bear from the attack. Following protocol for bears that have demonstrated aggression toward humans, wildlife officers euthanized the animal. Subsequent examination revealed the bear had been suffering from an abscessed tooth and moderate malnutrition, factors that possibly contributed to its aggressive behavior. After 6 months of therapy and gradual exposure training, Kincaid eventually resumed his career, though he implemented personal safety protocols that exceeded standard requirements. Years later, when asked about the incident, Kincaid would remark that the experience fundamentally changed his relationship with Alaska's wilderness, not diminishing his love for it, but tempering it with a deeper understanding of nature's unpredictability and the thin line between coexistence and conflict. Primorsky Krai, Russian Far East, 2009. The dense, primeval forests of Primorsky Krai near the Chinese border represented one of Russia's last true wilderness frontiers. Senior Lieutenant Vsevolod Konstantinovich Baranov, aged 42, led a 4-officer search party deep into this challenging terrain on May 27, 2009. Their mission was to locate a pair of missing hikers, Mikhail Eduardovich Sorokin and Natalia Andreevna Volkova, 2 university students from Vladivostok, who had failed to return from what was supposed to be a 3-day nature photography expedition. The police team included Junior Lieutenant Evgeny Tikhonovich Makarov, Sergeant Dmitry Artemovich Romanov, and Officer Galina Viktorovna Yermolova, all experienced members of the Regional Emergency Response Unit based in Ussurisk. The search began 48 hours after the hikers missed their scheduled check-in. Helicopter reconnaissance proved ineffective due to the dense canopy. Ground teams were deployed along the hikers' last known route, with Baranov's team assigned the most remote sector. Weather conditions had deteriorated overnight, with unseasonal heavy rain making tracking nearly impossible, and communication with base headquarters increasingly intermittent. By mid-afternoon, having covered approximately 12 kilometers of difficult terrain, the officers discovered a torn backpack that Baranov identified as matching the equipment the missing hikers carried. The evidence suggested animal interference, elevating concerns about the hikers' safety. Following standard protocol, Baranov ordered his team to form a wider search pattern, while always maintaining visual contact with at least one other officer. The team did not realize they had entered the territory of a female Ussuri brown bear with 2 young cubs. Wildlife experts later suggested that the cubs were likely born earlier that spring, making the mother particularly defensive. The recent heavy rain had likely washed away any scent markers that might have warned the officers of the bear's presence. Sergeant Romanov was the first to spot one of the cubs approximately 30 meters ahead, partially concealed behind a fallen log. He immediately signaled for the team to halt and began a cautious retreat, following proper wildlife encounter procedures. Before he could fully communicate the situation to his colleagues, a thunderous crashing sound erupted from the dense vegetation to their right. The mother bear, estimated to weigh over 600 kilograms, burst through the underbrush with extraordinary speed. Witnesses later described the sound as similar to a vehicle plowing through the forest. Senior Lieutenant Baranov, positioned closest to the charging animal, had barely enough time to unholster his service weapon before the bear was upon him. The powerful impact knocked him backward several meters, his weapon discharging once into the air before being lost in the underbrush. Junior Lieutenant Makarov and Officer Yermolova immediately moved to assist their colleague, using their batons and shouting to distract the bear. Their intervention likely saved Baranov's life, but redirected the bear's aggression. The animal swung its massive paw at Makarov, the claws tearing through his tactical vest and causing deep lacerations across his torso. Despite his injuries, Makarov continued attempting to distract the animal while Yermolova dragged the seriously injured Baranov toward a more defensible position behind a large boulder. Sergeant Romanov, who had maintained his distance from the initial attack, retrieved the emergency kit containing non-lethal deterrents. Due to budget constraints, the team had been equipped with standard-issue pepper spray rather than more effective bear deterrents, a policy decision that would later face severe criticism. Romanov discharged the pepper spray toward the bear, but the canister proved inadequate against such a large and agitated animal. The bear appeared momentarily disoriented but quickly renewed its aggressive posture. The officers fought to keep the bear at bay for nearly 15 minutes, using combinations of noise, limited non-lethal ammunition, and strategic positioning around the boulder. The region's poor reception hampered their radio calls for assistance, with only fragments of their emergency transmission reaching headquarters. The situation deteriorated further when the bear managed to drag Makarov away from the group, inflicting additional injuries to his legs and lower back. In a desperate effort to save his colleague, Sergeant Romanov located Baranov's lost service weapon and fired several warning shots into the air. The loud reports finally seemed to register with the bear, which temporarily retreated a short distance but remained visible, growling and pacing. This brief respite allowed Officer Yermolova, who had medical training, to apply rudimentary first aid to the two injured officers. The standoff continued for another 40 minutes before the distant sound of an approaching helicopter caused the bear to retreat further into the forest, eventually disappearing with her cubs. The helicopter contained the second search team, which had altered course after partially receiving the distress call. Their arrival likely prevented further casualties, though the delay in reaching the injured officers had allowed their conditions to deteriorate significantly. Emergency extraction proved challenging in the dense forest, requiring the creation of a makeshift clearing approximately 200 meters from the attack site. Senior Lieutenant Baranov had sustained multiple deep puncture wounds to his shoulders and chest, a dislocated hip, and internal bleeding. Junior Lieutenant Makarov suffered extensive lacerations, 3 broken ribs, and a severe concussion from being repeatedly thrown against trees during the attack. Both officers were transported to the regional hospital in Ussurisk before being transferred to Vladivostok's more advanced medical facilities. Despite suffering serious injuries, all 4 officers ultimately survived. Baranov required 6 surgeries and retired from active duty due to permanent mobility limitations. Makarov returned to administrative police work after 8 months of rehabilitation but never resumed field operations. The missing hikers, Sorokin and Volkova, were located 2 days later, approximately 5 kilometers from the attack site. They sought shelter in a rocky overhang after becoming disoriented in the heavy rain. While suffering from exposure and minor injuries, they were successfully evacuated and made full recoveries. The incident prompted significant revisions to search and rescue protocols in Primorsky Krai, including mandatory deployment of proper bear deterrents, enhanced communication equipment, and stricter requirements for wilderness guides and hikers. Wildlife officials opted not to hunt the bear involved, considering its behavior a natural defensive response to perceived threats to its cubs. Officer Yermolova later established a wilderness safety training program for law enforcement and civilian groups, incorporating lessons learned from the encounter. Sergeant Romanov continued his career in regional law enforcement, but requested a transfer to urban assignments. All 4 officers received commendations for bravery, with their experience becoming a case study in wildlife encounter management for Russian emergency services nationwide. Boulder, Colorado 2018. A park, nestled at the base of Boulder's iconic Flatirons, had long been the interface between urban convenience and wilderness adventure. Dr. Zephyrin Holloway Matsui, a 34-year-old cardiovascular researcher at a university in Colorado Medical Center, maintained a strict morning routine that included a 5:30 a.m. run through the park's network of trails, regardless of weather conditions. Having moved from Boston 3 years prior, Holloway Matsui had enthusiastically embraced Colorado's outdoor lifestyle, but retained an East Coast sensibility about wilderness precautions, often joking to colleagues that Bears belonged in documentaries, not on running paths. The morning of September 12, 2018, began like countless others, with Holloway Matsui arriving at the nearly empty parking lot, just as the eastern sky began to lighten. Autumn had arrived early that year, with nighttime temperatures dropping into the 40s, triggering increased foraging activity among the local wildlife preparing for winter, and the previous month had seen an unusually poor berry harvest in the higher elevations due to late spring frost, a detail that wildlife officials would later cite as significant. Holloway Matsui selected her favorite route, a moderate 4-mile loop that offered spectacular views of the Boulder Valley. 20 minutes into her run, as she rounded a bend in the trail flanked by dense oak brush, she encountered a large black bear approximately 30 yards ahead. The animal, later estimated to weigh around 300 pounds, was systematically dismantling a wooden trash receptacle that had been installed despite park management's transition to bear-resistant models throughout most of the park system. Having attended a community wildlife awareness workshop the previous year, Holloway Matsui recalled the recommended protocol for bear encounters. Stop, maintain distance, avoid direct eye contact, and back away slowly. She immediately halted and began a careful retreat, maintaining awareness of the path behind her to avoid tripping. The bear initially appeared undisturbed, continuing to investigate the trash container. Holloway Matsui couldn't know that this particular bear, later identified by its distinctive chest marking as Bear 228 inches in the parks and wildlife records, had developed problematic associations with humans over the previous 2 seasons. Wildlife officers had documented at least 7 incidents of the bear obtaining food from improper storage at campgrounds and residential areas bordering the park. Though previously relocated twice, the bear had returned to the Boulder area within weeks each time, displaying the remarkable homing instinct that often frustrates wildlife management efforts. When the bear suddenly raised its head and turned toward Holloway Matsui, she froze momentarily, then attempted to appear larger by raising her arms while slowly continuing her retreat. Witnesses who had entered the park shortly after Holloway Matsui, retired geology professor Winston Cabral and his wife Elena, observed the encounter from approximately 50 yards away on an intersecting trail. They later reported that the bear's demeanor changed abruptly, shifting from casual interest to focused attention. The animal charged directly toward Holloway Matsui, without the warning huffs or jaw-popping that bears sometimes display before aggressive action. Despite her athletic conditioning, the runner had no chance of outpacing the bear, which could reach speeds of 35 miles per hour in short bursts. She managed to cover only a few yards before the bear overtook her. The initial impact knocked Holloway Matsui face down onto the dirt path. The bear immediately delivered a powerful swipe that tore through her lightweight running jacket and caused deep lacerations across her upper back. As she instinctively curled into a protective position, the bear bit down on her right calf, its powerful jaws easily penetrating muscle tissue. The Cabrals, witnessing the attack, began shouting and throwing rocks toward the bear while calling emergency services on their cell phone. Whether due to the Cabrals' intervention or simply losing interest, the bear released Holloway Matsui after approximately 20 seconds and stood over her briefly before ambling a short distance away, still watching the humans with evident interest. Winston Cabral continued creating noise while Elena cautiously approached the injured runner, carefully helping her move toward their position without making sudden movements that might trigger another attack. The bear maintained its position, occasionally huffing and swaying its head, behavior experts later identified as indicating confusion rather than continued aggression. This standoff continued for nearly 4 minutes until the sound of approaching mountain bikers convinced the bear to retreat into the thicker vegetation bordering the trail. The arriving cyclists, professional outdoor photographer Maximiliano Ortega, and software developer Deshaun Washington, immediately provided additional first aid, using supplies from Washington's extensive emergency kit, which he carried due to his search and rescue volunteer work. Ortega remained with Holloway Matsui, while Washington rode back to the trailhead to guide emergency responders. The fire rescue arrived within 11 minutes, but the challenging terrain required a technical evacuation using a specialized wheeled litter. Wildlife officers established a perimeter throughout the 40-minute extraction and monitored for the bear's potential return. Holloway Matsui remained conscious, but in significant pain, maintaining remarkable composure that first responders would later commend. At a community health center, trauma surgeon Dr. Victoria Kaminsky treated Holloway Matsui's injuries, which included 4 deep puncture wounds to her right calf, a 3-inch laceration on her left shoulder, multiple abrasions, and a mild concussion from the initial impact. While serious, the injuries were not life-threatening. Holloway Matsui avoided the severe crushing damage that often characterizes bear attacks, suggesting the bear had exhibited restraint despite its aggressive approach. Holloway Matsui's recovery required 3 months of physical therapy to regain full function of her injured leg. The experience prompted her to advocate for wildlife awareness and proper food storage in bear country. She partnered with the Parks and Wildlife in Colorado to develop enhanced educational materials specifically targeting recreational trail users, emphasizing that wildlife encounters require preparation even within seemingly domesticated city parks. Perhaps most notably, Holloway Matsui returned to running the park exactly 1 year after the attack, carrying bear spray and running with a newly formed trail safety group she had helped organize. When interviewed about her decision to return, she remarked that understanding and respecting wildlife, rather than fearing it, had become an unexpected but valuable outcome of her traumatic experience. Svalbard Archipelago, Norway, 2021. The remote research station on Nordaustlandet, the second largest island in Norway's Svalbard archipelago, stood as a solitary human outpost amid one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. Dr. Kristoffer Magnusson, a 41-year-old Swedish glaciologist specializing in ice core analysis, had been conducting seasonal research at the station for nearly a decade. The late March 2021 expedition was intended to be his final field assignment before assuming a prestigious academic position at a university in Uppsala. Despite his extensive Arctic experience, Magnusson maintained a healthy respect for the region's apex predator, rigorously following the station's comprehensive polar bear safety protocols. A tripwire warning system surrounded the research station's permanent structures to detect approaching bears. Still, budget constraints had limited its coverage to approximately 70 meters from the main buildings. The station policy mandated that armed polar bear guards be used during extended fieldwork. Still, researchers working within the immediate station perimeter could carry only signal flares and air horns as deterrents. These protocols had proven effective for years, with the last significant bear encounter occurring in 2014. On the night of March 23, 2021, Magnusson had volunteered to remain at the station, while his 3 colleagues conducted overnight sampling at a glacier face approximately 2 kilometers distant. Unusually warm temperatures had accelerated melting, creating an opportunity to gather valuable comparative data that couldn't be postponed. The night was clear with a nearly full moon, providing better than average visibility across the snow-covered landscape surrounding the station. Shortly after midnight, Magnusson was analyzing recent core samples when he heard what he initially dismissed as wind-driven snow against the reinforced windows. When the sound repeated more deliberately, he cautiously approached the window. The station logs, later recovered from Magnusson's computer, noted his observation of unusual tracks in the fresh snow approximately 30 meters from the building, tracks that hadn't been present during his perimeter check 3 hours earlier. Trained to investigate potential bear activity from the station's safety, Magnusson used exterior cameras and spotlights to scan the immediate area. The system revealed no movement, but the tracks indicated a large polar bear had circled the building at least twice. Following protocol, Magnusson initiated radio contact with the field team to report the potential bear presence, then prepared the station's secured sleeping quarters where researchers would retreat in case of confirmed bear activity near the buildings. Magnusson didn't know that the station's perimeter alarm system had partially failed due to temperature fluctuations. These fluctuations had caused underground sensor cables to contract and break at key junction points. The system appeared operational on monitoring equipment, but had created gaps in coverage through which a predator could approach undetected. Magnusson followed procedure by securing all exterior access points before returning to his work, maintaining heightened awareness of his surroundings. He had just radioed an hourly check-in to the field team when he heard a distinctive scratching sound at the station's northern entrance, a reinforced door designed to withstand curious or aggressive bears. Recognizing the immediate danger, Magnusson retreated to the emergency communication station to issue an urgent alert. Before he could complete the transmission, a tremendous crashing sound echoed through the building as the bear redirected its attention to one of the station's older windows, a section scheduled for reinforcement later that season. The triple-pane glass, while substantial, had not been engineered to withstand the focused assault of a determined 1,000-pound predator. The station's security footage, recovered later, showed a large male polar bear systematically testing different window sections, applying increasing pressure until identifying a vulnerability where the frame had subtly warped during the previous summer's unusual heat wave. With methodical strength that astonished even experienced bear researchers who later reviewed the footage, The animal exploited this weakness until the seal failed catastrophically. Hearing the glass crack, Magnuson abandoned the communication equipment and ran toward the secure sleeping quarters. According to the recovered security footage timestamp, he came within 5 meters of safety when the window gave way completely. The bear entered the station with surprising agility for its size, immediately detecting Magnuson's presence. What followed was captured partially by the station's interior cameras and corroborated by physical evidence documented by the emergency response team. The bear charged across the main research area with extraordinary speed, intercepting Magnuson before he could secure the reinforced door of the sleeping quarters. The initial impact knocked him against the corridor wall with sufficient force to crack 2 ribs, as a later autopsy would reveal. Magnuson deployed his emergency flare gun directly toward the bear, showing remarkable presence of mind despite the danger. The bright pyrotechnic temporarily disoriented the animal, allowing Magnuson to scramble into an adjacent storage room. Unfortunately, this space lacked the reinforced door that might have provided adequate protection. The bear recovered quickly and renewed its assault, tearing through the standard interior door within seconds. Magnuson had managed to locate a maintenance pry bar among the stored equipment, which he wielded as the bear forced its massive body through the damaged doorway. Security footage showed him striking the bear's head with sufficient force to momentarily drive it back, an act of desperation that wildlife experts later suggested might have saved his life by startling rather than injuring the powerful predator. In the crucial seconds that followed, Magnuson seized the opportunity to retrieve the emergency supply bag, which was always kept in storage areas throughout the station. He extracted a powerful marine signal flare from this, a last resort deterrent significantly stronger than the handheld flare gun he had already deployed. Magnuson ignited the flare as the bear charged again, creating an intensely bright light and caustic smoke that filled the confined space. The bear retreated from the noxious fumes, but remained just outside the storage room, growling and pacing as captured by corridor security cameras. For nearly 20 minutes, Magnuson maintained this tenuous standoff, periodically waving the flare whenever the bear attempted to re-enter. Station logs show he managed to send a partial emergency signal using a backup radio system stored with the emergency supplies, though the transmission was fragmentary. When the flare finally burned out, the bear immediately renewed its assault with heightened aggression. Despite Magnuson's efforts to barricade himself behind storage shelving, the bear breached his defenses, delivering a powerful bite to his shoulder that fractured his clavicle and caused extensive tissue damage. As he fought back with the pry bar, the bear seized his leg and began dragging him from the storage room toward the main station entrance. Wildlife behavior experts would later describe what happened next as extraordinarily fortunate. Having received Magnuson's partial distress call, the field team immediately returned to the station and arrived just as the bear dragged Magnuson across the main research area. Team leader Dr. Ingrid Jorgensen, a veteran of 15 Arctic expeditions, discharged the team's rifle into the air outside the broken window. The sudden explosive sound, combined with the team's shouts and the headlights from their snowmobiles, created sufficient distraction for the bear to momentarily release Magnuson and turn its attention toward this new development. In this critical interval, field researcher Alejandro Dominguez managed to enter through a secondary access point and reach Magnuson, dragging him toward safety. At the same time, Jorgensen maintained the bear's attention with continued noise and light. The third team member, Dr. Fatemeh Nazari, radioed the archipelago's emergency services using the team's satellite communication equipment. After briefly approaching the window where Jorgensen stood with the rifle, the polar bear eventually retreated into the darkness beyond the station's exterior lights. Svalbard's specialized emergency response team, including a wildlife management officer, arrived via helicopter approximately 40 minutes later. By this time, Magnuson had received initial treatment from Nazari, who had emergency medical training, but his condition remained critical due to blood loss and the onset of shock. Magnuson was evacuated to a hospital in Longyearbyen before being transferred to a hospital in North Norway in Tromsø for specialized trauma care. He had sustained multiple deep lacerations, a fractured clavicle, torn shoulder muscles, puncture wounds to his right thigh, and moderate hypothermia from exposure during the evacuation. Despite these serious injuries, he survived and eventually recovered sufficient function to resume modified research duties, though persistent nerve damage in his right arm ended his fieldwork career. Norwegian authorities initiated a standard bear hunt following the attack, as is protocol for bears that have threatened human life. Using tracks and DNA evidence collected from the station, they identified and euthanized a mature male bear approximately 12 kilometers from the research station 2 days later. Examination revealed the animal was significantly underweight for the season, with limited fat reserves that would normally sustain it through periods of scarce prey. Scientists noted that its desperate nutritional state likely contributed to its unusual behavior in targeting a human dwelling. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of research station safety protocols throughout Svalbard. Investigators determined that the perimeter alarm failure resulted from inadequate adaptation to changing climate conditions. Traditional installation methods proved insufficient, as permafrost thaw and temperature fluctuations altered ground conditions. The Norwegian Polar Institute subsequently allocated emergency funding to upgrade all research stations with redundant warning systems and reinforced structural elements. Dr. Magnussen's experience became a mandatory worldwide case study in Arctic safety training programs. Upon his recovery, he collaborated with safety experts to develop enhanced protocols, specifically addressing the changing behavior patterns of polar bears affected by climate disruption. Though he never returned to Svalbard, Magnussen redirected his academic focus to climate communication, becoming an influential voice in conveying the cascading effects of Arctic warming on both wildlife and human safety.